I'm a big fan of Bunch of Crunch, which is this shit. I spent the last 4 hours of my Blender life making an advertisement for it. Check it out. This video is brought to you by Squarespace. More about that later. Did I do well? First of all, to make the actual box, I just took 2 photos with my phone. This is what taking a photo looks like. And then by just UV projecting this, I can get a photorealistic model of my box. And that includes flaps that have the origin set on their hinges. Also, this entire model was sent through a solidify modifier. This let me give it a bit of thickness and 2 different materials. The little pieces of chocolate was just geometry nodes. Just made a bunch of points, turned this thing into a cloudy volume, turned that back into a mesh, and with some blurring and some fancy stuff, you get the chocolate piece. I made 10 of these. Instead of taking each one of your objects and enabling rigid body world, you only do this for one object and say copy rigid body from selected. Also, all the rigid bodies were approximated using spheres. Spheres seem to, do the physics well. For the chocolate kind of like expanding at the end, I just added a force that all of a sudden gets a lot of like amplitude, a lot of energy. Some of these lights don't even make sense. They're just like attached onto the lids and stuff like that. But I took the primary red, blue, and yellow and used these as light sources that kind of give this whole scene this correct kind of volumetric color looking thing. Almost all the compositing in this project was actually compositing done directly in Blender. You can enable viewport compositing, which lets you see an approximation of what your compositing is going to look like in the viewport. I'm using the new AGX color space that I think is being added to a new version of Blender. It preserves a lot of information in high saturated areas. I don't know. So some other dude covered it. Chocolate falls, but then it kind of goes in slow motion, go to the rigid body world. There's a speed multiplier that you can animate. I keyframed this, and this is what let me do the slow motionness of it. Let's go shot by shot. For this first shot, we kind of have this kind of like circular reveal. What makes this look so good, in my opinion, is the extremely shallow depth of field that animates from the back to the front. I also did some kind of like compositing tricks like vignettes, and then also like lens distortion and dispersion. I modeled these flaps and set the origin on the hinge. One of these is actually using a mirror modifier, so I only had to do half as much work. For the keyframing, I use something called back interpolation. Kind of makes it overcorrect. It makes the animation look better. You can see I added a very kind of like subtle corrugation noisy effect. And these chocolate pieces in this shot are not simulated. I just made a box and distributed points inside that box, and the animation is just rotating these instances, having them move forward at random variable rates relative to the time of the scene. There's no like simulation nodes or physics or anything. Now for this shot, we obviously do have physics. And for all shots, but particularly this one, and I guess also the next one, motion blur is what really sells this effect, because it tells you how fast this chocolate is falling. You can see all of a sudden the motion blur goes down, implying that we're capturing more frames per second. In this last shot that I divided into a bunch of shots that are like discontinuously connected to each other, I also did a physics simulation, but this time I took my chocolate pieces and kind of scattered them vertically like a giant curtain of chocolate rain, if you will. This is chocolate rain. But importantly, it's also interacting with the box, which itself is moving forward with the camera, which is what is letting the chocolate accumulate at the front of this. For the very end of the shot, I did another spotlight lighting thing. So if I was to kind of like characterize this entire project, it's a mix of depth of field, outsourcing to geometry nodes, outsourcing the motion to a lot of physics, and using the colors from the box, and then also like the AGX color space and vignetting to kind of nail this advertisement high contrast look of this. There's like 4 blend files, and I'm going to package them all and make them available so that you can play around with it. There's a link in the description, but that is pretty much it. This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Okay. Squarespace is the best and the easiest place to make a website. I know this because I made a website with Squarespace. Let me look at you. The best feature is that you just drag around blocks and you don't code to construct your website. Get analytics so you know who is going to your website instead of just kind of guessing. There's also a content library, which means that any file you've used in your website is in that content library, so you never have to be afraid of losing it. After you go to Squarespace and try building your own website, you can use my link in the description to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Try making a website. Why not? What else are you going to do today?